The pathway of service is the final pathway in the Pearl sequence, kind of. And I'll tell you what I mean by that in a second. But it starts off with the pathway of initiative. And this is all about taking action. We use the analogy of stealing fire from the gods. The way this works is it's not just a gift. There are some things that we must do internally. That's important. It's not about external doing. It's about internal work, changing your view and understanding of the world. And taking that initiative is what leads us to growth. And this is growth emotionally. It is growth financially. It is growing to a more open heart. It's growth in every sense of the word. And then what seals this triangle, this Trinity, which you will find again and again in the gene keys: allow, accept, embrace, shadow, gift, city, challenge, breakthrough, core stability. Richard Rudd loves trinities, and this is what closes out this Trinity. And by sealing this triangle, we end up back at the sphere of our core. Except now we see our core through a new lens. We see it through the lens of our vocation. In other words, our deepest wound turns into the thing that drives our service out into the world. And by acting in service, we end up with these three not quite pathways, which is why I said this is kind of the last pathway in the Pearl sequence. And each of these is titled quantum. And I'm going to talk more about that quantum reality or quantum universe a little bit later in this video. But by stepping into service and by sealing this triangle, what happens is we create this vacuum. We create this torus energy, right? Where if you can imagine, these lines are actually in 360 degrees. I'm a really bad artist, so it's not going to look good geometrically. But a torus, think of like a donut shape, right? All this energy comes out, gets recycled back around, and then gets used for the next evolution. In other words, it's a system that loses no energy. That is what putting service first does for us. And what you need to remember, or what's helpful to remember, is that service I missed a V there. Service to the whole is service to you. You are the whole. There is no difference between you and I. We might have differences in opinion. We might have differences in what we do in the world. We might have differences in how we say things. But at my core, at the base of my heart and the base of my belly, there is this animating life force and principle that you also have. Therefore, if I serve you, the collective, the whole, then I am also serving me. There is a reward in giving. And the reward is in and of itself. So if you are in service with expectation of return, that messes this whole system and equation up. We serve to serve. And we trust that by showing up in service, you are going to be taken care of, whatever you need. That really is the leap that I'm trying to get you to see and understand and take. That is the definition of prosperity and abundance. Having what we need when we need it. And the pearl here in the center begins to take shape through these quantum currents. And in reality, the pearl is a gift from a higher evolution, a higher universe, if you will, a higher place. In the Corpus Christi, so Corpus Christi, which is, I want to say, described in the 22nd gene key. It's either 22 or 55. I'm pretty sure it's 22. The Corpus Christi are the different energy bodies that we have. So the lower three, physical, emotional, mental. And then we have our higher planes, causal, buddhic, and atmic. And in the Corpus Christi, we know that the causal plane is the plane at which spirit or the soul operates. And that is where the pearl comes from. And that causal plane is all about high archetypes. It's all about using all of yourself to see the reality that we live in. So the pearl is not going to dawn by thinking about it. It requires, yes, mind, but also heart and also body. All three of these parts of the Corpus Christi, the lower bodies combine together to take us to that causal plane. And there is a layer even beyond that, right? The causal plane, yes, is the soul layer, but it's still like, that's where our incarnations happen. It's like our unique energy signature mixed into the whole. But at the atmic and monadic bodies, the even higher bodies, even that begins to let go. Even our individuality on that level begins to fade away. And to understand this wisdom, to understand the pearl and what power service actually has, we have to see the universe in a totally different way. And that's what I'm going to start to talk about now, is just a completely different way of seeing the world, even a different way of seeing science. So the universe is based on what are called thermodynamics. And there are a few laws of thermodynamics. The first is that energy is not, and I'm paraphrasing here, created or destroyed. In other words, what's here is here, and it can only change forms. The second is that energy, again paraphrasing, moves from order to disorder, aka entropy. In other words, in a closed system, energy is always going to leak out. However, if that is true, if entropy, order to disorder is the truth, then man, what a sad universe we live in. Because it just means we're all doomed. We're destined to fall apart. And so in the gene keys, and I think just a more helpful worldview, we talk about what is called syntropy. And syntropy is the self-organizing principle of God, of spirit, of the universe. In other words, left to its own devices, nature is actually going to create systems that flow totally in balance and perfectly with one another. The problem comes when we start to dip our fingers in and think that we know better. But think about how this pertains to the opening of our heart, right? Again, if we see the world through the lens of entropy, through the lens of things falling apart, then my world is going to be run by fear, and I'm going to constantly be in a place of lack, needing to protect myself and shutting my heart down. If, though, we believe in syntropy, if we believe that the unknown is actually looking out for us, that there is a force in the universe that loves us, that organizes so that we can have the best possible experience, then that allows us to open our heart, and it totally changes how we show up in the world. And basically, for this law of thermodynamics, the way that it is described currently, for that to be true, we need to be in what's called a closed system. And what that means is that there's no energy entering or leaving the system. I'm going to go get the Pearl Sequence book. If a closed system is true, then there can be no such thing as a higher dimension. There can be no such thing as stuff that we can't see, perceive, or understand on this plane of reality. But I know from my life experience that that is simply not the case. So I want to read to you, this is from the Prosperity book that Richard Rudd has created. And this is on page 115 if you have it. And this is something that Richard wrote in 2005. He wrote his own law of thermodynamics. Infinite systems exist in infinite dimensions. So infinite systems as opposed to a closed system. It's interesting, right? Our mind can imagine infinity, kind of. And then at the same time, we have the gall to say that we lived in a closed system. When you really think about it, it doesn't make that much sense. So infinite systems exist in infinite dimensions. On account of this truth, the existence of closed systems can be seen as false. The perceived openness of any system is always equivalent to the frequency of consciousness pervading it. It is therefore the degree of openness of a given system to its own multidimensional nature that directly determines the flow of energy through that system. I'm going to read that one more time because it is so important. Infinite systems exist in infinite dimensions. On account of this truth, the existence of closed systems can be seen as false. The perceived openness of any system is always equivalent to the frequency of consciousness pervading it. It is therefore the degree of openness of a given system to its own multidimensional nature that directly determines the flow of energy through that system. In other words, the level to which you believe that there is a force, the level of which you are open to a higher plane of being, dictates the flow of energy through that system. That's why in manifestation, people talk about putting yourself in a positive energy state. This is what this is relating to. And this is actually evidenced by quantum physics. It tells us that the observer plays a role in what we are seeing in physical reality. In other words, your belief as the observer directly impacts whether something is showing up as a particle or as a wave. And that is absolutely insane when you think about it. But it's the truth. And what this tells us is that spirit needs a shell in order to evolve. So spirit steps itself down through the process of involution into the physical universe so that it can grow and evolve and change and adapt and come back into unity with itself. Where we got confused is that we see the universe as the spirit, right? We see the universe as all that is there. But in reality, the universe is just a shell of matter. It's the animating principle behind that universe that is infinite, not the universe itself. And when you start to touch that truth, you realize that if that's the case, then there is something else beyond everything that we can see, beyond everything that is measurable. Moving on now, I want to talk about black holes. And it's believed now that at the center of every galaxy, that there is a supermassive black hole. And all of the stars are rotating around that black hole. And that makes a ton of sense to me, because what that tells is that from darkness, from this black hole, light emerges. And in the Hermetic philosophy, there is a saying, as above, so below. So if this is true, if there's a supermassive black hole at the center of every galaxy, if you take that to your body, there is a black hole in the center of you. And that black hole is your core wound. And from that core wound, your light emerges. You show up in service and you begin to help change the world. There's another principle in Hermetic philosophy, which is called the Principle of Polarity. And essentially what that means is that there is an energy and it has two sides to it. So for example, we've got fear and we've got courage. We've got love and we've got hate. So if the principle of polarity is true at a cosmic level, as above, so below, it is also true inside of you. And on the cosmic level, if the principle of polarity is true, which I believe it is, then there must be white holes. And white holes inside your body, that is your higher purpose. That is your gift that you have to share with the world. So in other words, behind every black hole is a white hole. What does that sound like to you? Behind every black hole, there is a white hole. I'm going to tell you what it sounds like to me. Every shadow contains a gift. If only we have the eyes to see it. So from black holes and white holes, the next thing I want to get into is an exploration of time. Because as we think about black holes, you know that all light is sucked into those black holes, but also time starts to warp and change as we get closer to that black hole, because it too is being sucked in. But to understand time, we have to redefine light. So we see light as moving, right? We have the term the speed of light, which is like what? 186,000 miles an hour? 187, something like that. But that would mean that a light year, for example, it takes 4 light years to get from here to maybe Alpha Centauri. And I don't know if that's accurate, but that means if we were moving at the speed of light, it would take us 4 years to reach that planet. However, light appears to travel because our minds are stuck in this framework of seeing things through time. Our brains are designed to perceive the past and predict the future. We see everything through time, and because of that, it appears, time makes light appear to travel. However, if you think about a wave, for example, in the ocean, I surfed this morning, it looks like that wave is moving towards me, right? It looks like those water molecules are moving at me as I'm sitting there in the lineup waiting to paddle on a wave to take off on. But in reality, what's happening is each individual water molecule is rising and falling right where it is, in place. That wave is not actually the water molecules moving towards me. It's each molecule lifting up, coming back down, and then the next lifts up and comes back down, and then the next lifts up and comes back down. And in the same way, this is what light is doing. And therefore, this is what time is doing. So in other words, we see light traveling from point A to point B. But in reality, there's light at point A, there's light at point B, and there's light all the way in between. So it's not this point moving from this point to this point. It's this one turns on, and then this one turns off. And then this one on, off, on, off, on, off. And so to us, it looks like it's traveling down the line. And time is the same thing. And I know we're getting deep here and it's hard to comprehend in your head, but feel it in your body. The only way to comprehend this paradox is below your mind. You've got to use your heart. You've got to use your belly. You've got to use your body. There is a place, and the way that I want to talk about this is there is a place where time stands still. Even in our current operating system, our current human vehicles, this place exists right now. And that place is the present moment. When you are in the present moment, time is only there. There is no before, there is no after. The present moment swallows time and light and thought. If you think about the flow state, which I'm sure we've all been in at some point in our lives, it is timeless. 5 hours can pass in what feels like 5 minutes. Time is so subjective. And in that present moment that swallows time and light and thought, that is what is called, in the Gene Keys teachings, absorption. And absorption is about that torus energy that I talked about at the very beginning of this video. You get to a certain point in your evolution where all the energy that you put out into the world, because of that triangle getting locked in with this pathway of service, it all feeds back into you. And so we just reach higher and higher dimensions of energy. And all of this finally takes us to gravity. And gravity is another word for the shadow, right? It pulls us down. Gravity is this force that we think only works in one direction. But the law of polarity tells us that cannot be true. If we only see gravity, then what we are is a victim to an outside force. There is this thing that is constantly pulling us down. What if this same force could be used for levity, for lifting us up? We don't know how to do this yet. I'm not saying that this is something that we comprehend, or we can comprehend, but we haven't been able to prove it yet. But because of the law of polarity, because everything in the universe is a representation or holographic in nature, there must be levity. There must be this other force. We believe if we're going from a point A to a point B, what gets us there is propulsion. In other words, a rocket or an engine moving us. However, there are other forms of transport. If you've ever heard of a man named Bob Lazar, he's got a crazy story. This dude built like a rocket car in like the 80s. And he worked at some secret US bases, and he has a very compelling story. I encourage you to look into it. But one of the things that he was doing is reverse engineering, allegedly, some crashed ships that the government got its hands on. And he believed that there is a way to use the reverse of gravity, or kind of to distort gravity, which is really what I'm getting at here with levity, to propel us forward. So instead of propulsion, we capture the force that is gravity and we use it to move ourselves. Another thing that I find interesting is that levity is our word, or a word, for lightness and laughter. It's like we always know, in our core of cores, we always know that there are counter forces here. I don't think that this is a mistake. I love how the universe works. In order to see this, again, you've got to make the shift to the causal body. That needs to be the main operating system through which you see the world. Not here, not here, not here, but all of those combined give us the view that we need. And objectivity changes everything. And what I mean by that is, again, going back to quantum mechanics, the observer directly impacts the outcome of something. And if that is true, science up until this point has been dependent on objective observation. And what quantum mechanics tells us is there is no such thing. Our mind is wrapped up in what's happening in the physical world, or our consciousness, or whatever. We don't understand what is happening. But because of that, we essentially, in my opinion, need to start science all over again. Because we know at this point it is not objective. And we can't really even perceive what that worldview might look like. It's like going back to the time before the wheel. Like the way that those people saw the world is so different from the way that we see the world now that we can't even really perceive it. We can't even really understand their worldview. And that is the case for science now. That is the case. That's what's going to happen in the future. Thousands of years from now, tens of thousands of years from now, people are going to look back and we're going to be like the people before the wheel. I know that in the core of my being. So this is actually the last pathway. I have videos on every single pathway through the profile. So if you are working your way through your profile, go to the playlist titled Pathways, look at them. I also have done one now for every single sphere along the way. So with those videos, I think that you have some really helpful tools to work through what the next steps are you need to take regardless of where you are in the journey. And I'd like to invite you to the Wisdom Call, which is every other Thursday. I do a free call where you can just come, show up. I promise there is no salesy stuff. I do mention that I work with people for like 3 minutes at the end of the call, but I'm doing that right now. It's a place for you to ask questions. It's a place for you to gain clarity. It's a place for you to be around other like-minded individuals on this journey, and that is what we all need. So please come to that. And then I also have a great piece of news, which is people that come to those wisdom calls consistently have asked for a community, a place to meet up and gather. And I have started working on that today. So I'm excited. I'm not going to announce what it is or where it is quite yet, but that is coming sooner than later. Thank you guys for being here. I hope this was helpful. I know this was an esoteric one today, but hopefully it opens your body, mind, soul, emotions, and helps move the needle for you. Thank you guys so much for being here. Until next time.